Robert Wilson stared at the bank statement, his weathered fingers trembling as they traced the pattern of withdrawals. $4,500, $3,200, $5,000, each coinciding perfectly with Catherine's shopping trips. 40 years of marriage, and now this betrayal revealed in cold numerical evidence. The grandfather clock ticked in the silence of his wood-paneled den, marking time as his world collapsed. Coffee grew cold beside him, its familiar aroma now mingling with the salt of tears he couldn't hold back. A family photo watched from his desk. Last Christmas, everyone smiling, his arm around the woman he thought he knew. Has someone you trusted completely betrayed you too? Share your story below, like if this hits home, and follow as Robert fights for his dignity. His finger paused on the latest withdrawal date, mind flashing to Catherine's expensive new perfume, her secretive phone calls. As the first tear fell onto the statement, smudging the ink, he heard her voice in the hallway. "No, he won't be around for Christmas." Robert Wilson settled into the familiar creak of his leather chair, spreading the monthly bank statements across his mahogany desk. Sunday evening ritual, unchanged for 40 years. The grandfather clock in the corner measured time with steady precision, each tick marking another moment of his carefully constructed life. Lamplight cast a warm glow over the financial documents, creating islands of clarity in the wood-paneled den where he'd planned their retirement, celebrated promotions, and dreamed of golden years with Catherine. His finger moved methodically down the column of withdrawals, practiced from decades as a financial manager, then stopped. $4,500 on the 18th, $3,200 the following week, $5,000 just 3 days ago. Each date perfectly aligned with Catherine's shopping trips. His breath caught as he cross-referenced her calendar entries. Something ain't right here. The thought formed slowly, reluctant to take shape. Robert removed his reading glasses, pinching the bridge of his nose where pressure had been building all evening. 40 years of marriage had taught him Catherine's patterns. These weren't them. The family photo on his desk caught his eye. Last Christmas, everyone smiling. His arm around Catherine's shoulders, her smile bright beneath the holiday lights. Had it been genuine? The memory of her sudden interest in new clothes, hairstyles, expensive perfume these past months shifted into sharper focus. A single tear formed, tracking down his weathered cheek before he could catch it with his handkerchief. His hand trembled slightly as he reached for their wedding photo beside the statements. Catherine, young and radiant, looking at him like he'd given her the world. Had he imagined that look? Had 40 years been a performance? "Everything all right, dear?" Catherine's voice floated from the hallway. "Just finishing up," he answered, voice steady despite the quiver in his hands. Years of boardroom negotiations had taught him to mask emotion. He carefully aligned the bank statements, professional habits providing structure when his world threatened to tilt. The withdrawals totaled over $12,000 in just 3 weeks, money they'd set aside for retirement, for security, for the future that suddenly seemed built on sand. His eyes caught a notation he'd missed, a withdrawal location at a jewelry store he'd never visited, a men's shop where he'd never purchased a thing, restaurants on evenings he'd worked late, believing Catherine was home waiting. The clock chimed 9, the sound echoing in the sudden stillness of his thoughts. Robert's throat tightened as he slipped the statements into a folder, tucking it carefully into his desk drawer. His chest felt hollow, as if something essential had been scooped out, leaving only the shell of the man who'd entered this room an hour ago. He rose slowly, legs unsteady beneath him. The photograph of Catherine now seemed to mock him from the desk. Through the doorway, he could hear her humming in the kitchen, the sound of normalcy when nothing was normal anymore. Robert was reaching to turn off the lamp when he heard it, Catherine's phone ringing, her voice dropping to a whisper as she answered. He froze, hand suspended in midair. "No, he won't be around for Christmas," she said softly. "I've made sure of it." The tear he'd been holding back finally fell, landing on the polished desk where he'd once felt so certain of his place in the world. Morning light flooded the kitchen as Robert stirred his coffee, watching Catherine prepare for another lunch with friends. 3 times this week already. He'd barely slept, the numbers from last night's discovery repeating in his mind like an accusation. $4,500, $3,200, $5,000. The coffee grew cold in his mug. A 15th anniversary gift, to my wonderful husband, etched on the side in fading script. "Any special plans for Christmas this year?" he asked, keeping his voice casual despite the weight in his chest. Last night's whispered phone conversation had replayed in his dreams. Catherine paused just for a heartbeat, a slight hesitation most would miss. But Robert had spent decades reading financial reports for hidden problems. He'd learned to spot the pause before a lie. "Oh, just the usual family gathering," she said, not quite meeting his eyes. "We should discuss details later." He nodded, watching her apply lipstick brighter than she typically wore. Her expensive perfume lingered heavily in the air between them, a scent he hadn't chosen. She kissed his cheek before leaving, and Robert closed his eyes briefly, fighting the sting behind his eyelids. The door had barely closed when he opened his laptop. Their joint credit card statements appeared on screen, the password as familiar as his own name. Robert scrolled methodically, the financial manager in him taking control when the husband wanted to crumble. There it was, a $650 designer shirt, men's size medium, too small for his frame. An $800 watch he'd never seen on her wrist, or his hotel charges in the city on evenings she'd claimed book club meetings, restaurants he'd never visited on nights he'd worked late. "Who are you?" The question formed as he caught his reflection in the kitchen window, surprised by the vulnerability visible in his eyes. Had neighbors seen what he'd missed? Had friends exchanged glances behind their backs at dinner parties? His throat tightened as he recalled Catherine's mentions of her cousin Michael visiting when Robert traveled to his sister's. He searched family albums, finding no photos of this supposed relation. The calendar on the wall confirmed it, each visit perfectly aligned with Robert's absences. A memory surfaced of Catherine laughing on the phone last month, her voice dropping when she noticed him entering the room. The same laugh from their early years, now reserved for someone else. Robert cleared the browser history with methodical precision, years of handling sensitive financial information guiding his movements. His mind was already forming a plan, the strategic thinking that had made his career successful, now turning toward his disintegrating marriage. Catherine's phone rang just as she was putting on her coat at the door. She checked the caller ID, her expression shifting subtly. "I need to take this," she said with unusual firmness, stepping outside onto the porch. Through the window, Robert watched her smile, a bright, genuine expression he hadn't seen directed at him in longer than he cared to admit. The kind of smile that had once made him feel like the luckiest man alive. He turned away, the cold coffee bitter on his tongue as he considered who he needed to call. Martin would understand. Martin had lived through this himself. Robert's heart pounded against his ribs as he eased open Catherine's desk drawer. The house stood silent around him, Catherine at her Thursday book club, a 3-hour window he'd never questioned before today. Afternoon sunlight filtered through the curtains she'd chosen when they first moved in, casting long shadows across the study they'd once shared. Now it felt like trespassing in a stranger's home. His fingers moved carefully through organized files, leaving everything exactly as found. Catherine had always been meticulous about her personal paperwork, a trait he'd once admired. The second drawer revealed nothing unusual, but the third contained a stack of restaurant receipts paper-clipped together. Bistro Nouveau, La Maison, the waterfront grill, expensive places he'd never visited, On evenings he'd been working late or traveling for his sister's birthday. Each receipt showed a table for two, wine selections he didn't recognize, desserts shared. "Who have you become?" he whispered to the empty room, the question hanging unanswered in the dust motes dancing through sunbeams. The velvet jewelry box in her vanity drawer yielded another discovery. An unfamiliar key tucked beneath her grandmother's pearls, not to their home, car, or safe deposit box. Something else entirely, something he wasn't meant to find. Catherine's tablet chimed on the nightstand. Robert froze, ethical instincts warring with the need to know. The message preview appeared without requiring a password. "Looking forward to Christmas together, finally. M." Michael. The cousin, who wasn't a cousin at all. His hands trembled as he carefully returned everything to its precise location, leaving no trace of his search. Years of handling confidential financial documents had taught him to be thorough, to leave no evidence. The irony wasn't lost on him, using professional skills honed over decades to uncover his wife's deception. Robert made his way to the garden bench where they'd once planned their retirement dreams. The roses Catherine had lovingly tended for years now grew wild and unkempt, much like the truth he was finally facing. The December air bit through his sweater, but he barely noticed the cold. From a nearby house, Christmas music floated on the breeze, the cheerful melody a cruel counterpoint to his crumbling world. For the first time since discovering the bank statements, he allowed himself to break down completely. His shoulders shook with silent sobs as the sun began to set, painting the sky in colors Catherine had once said reminded her of their honeymoon. 40 years of memories, tainted by doubt. How much had been real? How much performance? He twisted the wedding band that hadn't left his finger in 4 decades, tears falling unchecked onto his hands. No witnesses, but the darkening sky and the distant laughter of children playing, oblivious to how quickly happiness could dissolve. Robert was still sitting there when Catherine's car pulled into the driveway. He wiped his face, straightened his spine, decades of business meetings teaching him to compose himself regardless of internal turmoil. "There you are," Catherine said, finding him in the garden. "About Christmas, I think we should discuss our plans. I was thinking you might want to visit your sister instead of our usual gathering here." Her expression remained unreadable in the fading light, but her words carried the weight of confirmation. The diner's vinyl booth creaked as Robert shifted, his coffee untouched between his hands. Across from him, Martin Reeves waited patiently, cleaning his glasses, a habit from 30 years of accounting work together. Around them, the familiar clatter of plates and murmur of conversations created a bubble of normalcy when nothing felt normal anymore. "I wouldn't have called if," Robert began, then stopped, throat tightening around words he couldn't form. "Catherine?" Martin asked softly, understanding immediately. The simple question broke something in Robert. He nodded, eyes dropping to the table where their coffees steamed between them. 3 years ago for me," Martin said, replacing his glasses. "Ellen and the tennis instructor found out when she'd gone through most of our retirement fund." Mary, the waitress who'd known them both for decades, refilled their cups without comment, her motherly glance at Robert revealing she sensed something was wrong. The Christmas music playing overhead seemed to mock the heaviness between them. "Over 200,000, Robert finally said, his voice barely audible. "That I've found so far." Martin didn't look surprised. "Start at the beginning," he said, pulling a notebook from his jacket, the same organized approach that had made him a valued colleague. "Tell me everything." For the next hour, they fell into the familiar rhythm of professionals tackling a problem. Bank statements spread between coffee cups, credit card records, calendar entries. Martin took meticulous notes, asking clarifying questions with the precision that had made him an excellent accountant. "Michael Grant," Martin said finally, "real estate agent, if it's the same one. Works high-end properties downtown. Robert's hands tightened around his mug. You know him? Know of him. Sold Ellen a condo after our divorce. Martin's smile held no humor. Small world. Back home, Robert executed the plan they'd formulated. He created a spreadsheet tracking every suspicious transaction over the past 3 years. The total made his stomach clench, $217,850. Money they'd earmarked for retirement, for medical emergencies, for security in their final years. He searched the name online, finding Michael Grant's professional profile, handsome, mid-50s, specializing in luxury properties. The testimonials page included a familiar name, Catherine Wilson, from 6 months ago. Michael understood exactly what I was looking for. The double meaning turned Robert's blood cold. Social media connections revealed more. Check-ins at restaurants matching receipt dates, photos at events during Robert's business trips. In one image, a man's hand rested on a table beside a woman's manicured fingers, Catherine's distinctive emerald ring clearly visible. The watch on the man's wrist matched the $800 purchase on their credit card. Something snapped inside Robert. The careful control he'd maintained through meetings with Martin, through methodical documentation, finally broke. He slammed his fist against the steering wheel of his parked car, tears of rage streaming down his face. My money, he choked out. My retirement. My wife. Each word punctuated by another blow to the wheel. The dashboard held a photo of Catherine he'd kept there for years. Her smile, once his comfort, now seemed calculating, measuring what else she could take. Robert forced himself to breathe deeply, regaining control one exhale at a time. 40 years of professional discipline hadn't abandoned him. Enough, he whispered, wiping tears with the back of his hand. He started the car, mind shifting from discovery to strategy. The financial manager who'd guided countless clients through crises was taking control of his own. The tears had cleared his vision, rather than blurring it. For the first time since finding those bank statements, Robert knew exactly what he needed to do. He pulled out his phone and dialed his son's number. James needed to hear the truth, from him, before Catherine could spin her version. The call went to voicemail. Robert's message was simple. Son, we need to talk. Lunch tomorrow? As he drove home, the Christmas lights on houses along the way seemed less like celebration and more like warning signals, bright distractions from what happened in the shadows. Robert arrived early at Alessandro's, the upscale restaurant where they'd celebrated James's law school graduation 5 years ago. He requested the corner table, private enough for difficult conversations, positioned where he could see the entrance. The maitre d', recognizing him as a regular, nodded sympathetically at his obvious tension. He'd prepared meticulously, bringing a slim folder with key financial documents. Not everything, just enough to make his case without overwhelming James. The strategy had served him well through decades of financial consultations. Present clear evidence, answer questions calmly, allow the other party to process. When James entered, Robert felt a surge of pride despite his anxiety. His son moved with confidence through the restaurant, greeting staff by name, straightening his tie, gestures that mirrored Robert's own habits. At 42, James had his father's analytical mind, but his mother's social ease, a combination that had made him a successful corporate attorney. Dad, James said, embracing him briefly before sitting. You sounded concerned on the phone. Everything okay? Robert took a steadying breath. I've discovered some financial irregularities I need to discuss with you. Concerning your mother. He began carefully, explaining the suspicious withdrawals, the credit card charges, the timeline of deception. James listened with a furrowed brow, asking occasional clarifying questions, the lawyer emerging as personal concerns deepened. That's a lot to process, James said finally. Are you absolutely certain? Could there be explanations you haven't considered? I've verified everything multiple times, Robert replied, sliding the folder across the table. The pattern is unmistakable. James had just opened the folder when his phone rang. He glanced at the screen, hesitated, then answered. "Hi, Mom. Yes, I'm with him now." Robert watched his son's expression shift as Catherine spoke. The furrow between James's brows deepened. His eyes darted to Robert, then away. The conversation lasted less than a minute, but when James hung up, something fundamental had changed. "Dad," he said carefully, "Mom's worried about you. She says you've been acting paranoid lately, fixating on finances, making accusations." "She called you preemptively," Robert said, the realization landing like a physical blow. "She knew I would reach out. She mentioned you might be experiencing some confusion, that sometimes you forget things, get dates mixed up." The implication hung in the air between them, age-related cognitive decline, the ultimate dismissal. "I'm not confused, James." Robert kept his voice steady despite the earthquake beneath his composure. "I've documented everything meticulously." The restaurant door opened and Catherine entered. James's lack of surprise confirmed what Robert already knew. This had been coordinated. His wife approached their table with practiced concern on her face, every movement calculated for their audience. "I was so worried," she said, placing a hand on Robert's shoulder, the same hand that had held another man's, spent his money, planned deceptions. "When James told me you wanted to meet, I just had to come. We were just discussing some financial concerns," Robert said, each word measured. "Darling, you know I've never understood all those numbers." Catherine's laugh tinkled like breaking glass. "James, your father's been under so much stress lately. Dr. Winters suggested we might need to consider memory assessments. At his age..." James looked between them, his loyalty visibly torn. The law career Robert had proudly funded, the mother who had attended every school event. Catherine's hand remained on Robert's shoulder, her grip firm despite her fragile appearance. "Dad, maybe you should rest," James suggested gently. "We can discuss this when you're feeling more centered." In that moment, Robert lost them both. His son to Catherine's manipulation, his wife to her own deceptions. The double betrayal left him hollow, speechless. "I'll help him home," Catherine told James. "We'll call you tomorrow." Robert maintained his dignity throughout the remainder of lunch, speaking little, eating nothing. The financial documents remained unexamined in the folder. When James embraced him goodbye, Robert felt the hesitation in his son's arms, the careful distance of someone approaching someone fragile, broken. "I love you, Dad," James said. The unspoken "but" hung between them. Catherine declined Robert's offer to drive, insisting on separate cars. "I have errands afterward," she explained with a smile that never reached her eyes. Robert drove aimlessly after leaving the restaurant, eventually finding himself at Wilson Park, where he'd pushed James on the swings decades ago. The playground stood empty in the winter afternoon, the same metal slides and swings now surrounded by more modern equipment. He sat heavily on a bench, the cold seeping through his coat. For the first time, doubt crept in. Was he overreacting? Misinterpreting? The thought vanished as quickly as it formed. The evidence wasn't subjective. Numbers didn't lie. What hurt most wasn't Catherine's betrayal. He'd begun to accept that reality. It was James's willingness to believe he was confused, failing, unreliable. A young father pushed a boy on the swings nearby, their laughter carrying on the cold air. The child couldn't have been more than 5, the age James had been when they'd visited this same park every Sunday. Robert watched them through tears that froze on his cheeks, the gulf between then and now unbridgeable. He'd lost his wife to another man. He'd lost his son to doubt. He'd lost his dignity to Catherine's performance of concern. What remained? doubled over on the park bench. Robert Wilson, who had maintained composure through market crashes, client crises, and board meetings, finally broke completely. Heaving sobs racked his body, unwitnessed except by bare trees and winter birds. The sounds tore from his chest, raw and primal, the culmination of every silent tear he'd shed since finding those bank statements. In this moment of absolute solitude, at his lowest point, he wondered if anything remained worth fighting for. Has a loved one's betrayal left you drowning in tears? The pain cuts deeper when family takes their side. Share your experience below, like if this resonates with your heart, and follow for Robert's journey from despair to dignity. Will he find the strength to stand alone? I thought I might find you here. The voice cut through Robert's fog of despair. He looked up to find Martin standing a few feet away, hands tucked into his coat pockets against the December chill. How did you... Robert began, hastily wiping his face. When you didn't answer your phone, I tried a few places. Martin settled beside him on the bench, offering a handkerchief without comment. This park was third on my list. Robert accepted the handkerchief, grateful for the simple dignity of the gesture. She got to James before I could explain. Made me sound confused, elderly, unstable. His voice caught on the last word. Ellen did the same with our daughter, Martin said quietly. Told her I was having a breakdown. Jealous, controlling. He gazed at the empty playground. It took 6 months before Ashley discovered the truth herself. 6 months, Robert echoed, the time frame stretching before him like an abyss. They sat in silence, broken only by the distant sounds of traffic and the occasional call of winter birds. Two retired professionals, decades of accomplishments behind them, facing betrayals they never anticipated in their twilight years. I almost believed her, Robert finally admitted. For a moment in that restaurant, I wondered if I was the one losing my grip on reality. That's how they work, Martin replied. They make you doubt yourself. It's their most effective weapon. I don't know what's left to fight for, Robert said, the confession painful but necessary. The money? The house? A marriage that was apparently fiction? Martin turned to face him directly. Your dignity, Robert. Your truth. The right not to pay for their betrayal. Something in Martin's words penetrated the haze of despair. Robert straightened slightly, professional instincts stirring beneath the emotional wreckage. You're right, he said softly, then with more conviction. You're right. Let's get out of this cold, Martin suggested. I know a place we can talk. 20 minutes later, they entered the community center where Robert volunteered financial advice to seniors. The familiar space, with its worn desk and filing cabinets, awakened something essential in him. Here, he wasn't a betrayed husband or a dismissed father. He was Robert Wilson, financial expert, respected advisor, man of precision and insight. The scent of paper and ink, the certificates lining the walls recognizing his professional achievements, the weathered leather chair that still conformed perfectly to his frame, all served as tactile reminders of his competence. The evening security lights cast a purposeful glow as they spread documents across the desk. Let's approach this systematically, Robert said, reaching for a pen with newfound steadiness. What do we know for certain? For the next 3 hours, they built upon their earlier work, organizing evidence chronologically, identifying patterns, connecting financial threads to create an irrefutable case. Tears occasionally tracked down Robert's cheeks as particularly painful discoveries emerged, but they no longer stopped his progress, merely marked moments in his journey from victim to advocate for his own interests. The house and mortgage are solely in your name, his financial advisor confirmed during a brief phone consultation. As are the investment accounts and retirement funds. Her name was never added. She suggested I visit my sister for Christmas, Robert recalled, the significance suddenly clear. She's planning a dinner, here, in our home, with him, Martin's eyebrows rose. That's bold. No, Robert corrected, a plan forming with crystalline clarity. That's an opportunity. As evening deepened into night, Robert's resolve strengthened with each document organized, each strategy formulated. The tears that occasionally fell no longer signified despair, but determination, the release of one emotion making room for another. You understand this isn't about revenge, Robert said as they finalized their approach. It's about consequences, justice. I understand completely, Martin replied. Ellen never faced real consequences. That was my mistake. Robert stood at the window, watching snowflakes begin to fall in the parking lot. Behind him, the evidence of Catherine's betrayal lay organized in meticulous files, the work of a financial manager who'd spent decades protecting clients from exactly this kind of exploitation. I've been a fool, he said softly. You've been a husband, Martin corrected. There's a difference. Robert turned back to the desk, straightening his tie in the reflection of the darkened computer screen. His eyes, though reddened, now held purpose rather than pain. He could see himself clearly for perhaps the first time since discovering those bank statements, not just the betrayed husband, but the skilled professional, the strategic thinker, the man who'd built a career on careful analysis and decisive action. Thank you, he said simply, extending his hand to Martin. For what? Martin asked, accepting the handshake. For finding me at that park. For reminding me who I am. As they gathered the documents into Robert's briefcase, a plan solidified between them, not born of vindictiveness, but of justice, not seeking to wound but to right a fundamental wrong. Christmas dinner, Robert said, closing the briefcase with a decisive click. I believe I'll be attending after all. The snow fell more heavily as they left the community center, covering the day's footprints, creating a clean slate where new paths could be forged. For the first time since discovering Catherine's betrayal, Robert felt something like peace, not because the pain had diminished, but because he'd found purpose within it. He slept soundly that night, awakening with clarity rather than confusion. The tears would come again. He had no illusions about the emotional terrain ahead, but they would no longer define him. Catherine had taken enough. His dignity, his agency, his future, these he would reclaim, one decisive step at a time. Robert's finger hovered over the transfer button on his banking app. One touch would move all remaining joint funds to his personal account, funds Catherine likely intended for Christmas dinner with her lover. The irony wasn't lost on him. He pressed down firmly, watching the confirmation appear on screen. Next came the mortgage payment cancellation. The customer service representative expressed concern. Are you sure, Mr. Wilson? You've never missed a payment in 30 years. I'm sure, Robert replied, his voice steady with newfound resolve. Family circumstances have changed. With each decisive action, Robert reclaimed another piece of himself. The financial leverage Catherine never anticipated him discovering. The professional expertise she'd dismissed as he managed their affairs for decades. The quiet strength she'd mistaken for passivity. He called his sister in Michigan, a conversation he'd dreaded but couldn't postpone. Barbara, I need to change our Christmas plans, he began, his voice catching slightly. Robert, what's wrong? His sister's concern was immediate, genuine. He explained briefly, each word painful but necessary. Barbara's initial shock gave way to quiet fury on his behalf. You're not visiting then? She asked when he'd finished. No, Robert replied. I need to be here. To face this directly. Do you want me to come there? You shouldn't be alone for this. The offer touched him deeply. No, but thank you. I'm not alone. Martin's helping me. And this is something I need to do myself. After ending the call, Robert turned to the evidence folder on his desk. He organized each document meticulously. Bank statements, credit card receipts, calendar entries, property records. all tabbed and highlighted with the precision that had defined his career. The folder represented more than evidence. It was a reclamation of his expertise, his attention to detail, the professional identity Catherine had tried to undermine with her claims of his confusion. He selected his navy suit for the confrontation, the one he'd worn to his retirement party 5 years ago, when colleagues had celebrated his distinguished career. The fabric still fit perfectly, a small victory that felt surprisingly significant. Standing before the mirror, he straightened his tie with hands that no longer trembled. The reflection showed a man transformed from the one who had broken down on that park bench, spine straighter, jaw firmer, eyes clear with purpose rather than clouded by doubt. A single tear tracked down his cheek, but its nature had changed. This wasn't a tear of devastation, but of determination. Robert wiped it away, nodding at his reflection. The man looking back at him was someone he recognized again. Christmas Eve arrived with perfect, terrible clarity. Robert parked his car down the street from the house he'd owned for 30 years, watching guests arrive for Catherine's dinner party. Each carried gifts or dishes, unaware they were walking into the final act of a marriage built on deception. A sleek sports car pulled into the driveway. Michael Grant, right on schedule. Robert watched him exit the vehicle, bearing an expensive bottle of champagne and a wrapped gift. The confident smile, designer suit, and casual charm were exactly as expected from his online profile. The watch glinting on his wrist was the one purchased with Robert's money. Sitting in his car, Robert experienced a moment of nervous anticipation. His heart raced, palms dampened with sweat. Was he making a mistake? Would this public confrontation solve anything? The doubt lasted only seconds before resolution returned. This wasn't about humiliating Catherine or her lover. It wasn't even about the money, though the financial exploitation demanded accountability. This was about truth, about refusing to fund his own betrayal, about standing up when others expected him to stay silent. He took a deep breath, checking his reflection in the rearview mirror. One final tear escaped, which he wiped away with determination. There would be time for emotion later. Now was the time for clarity, for the financial manager who had guided countless clients through crises to manage his own with dignity. When betrayal shatters your trust, facing the truth takes extraordinary courage. Have you ever had to stand up against someone who thought you were too weak to fight back? Comment your story of strength, like for support, and follow for the dramatic confrontation that will change everything tonight. How will they react when he walks through that door? Robert straightened his tie, squared his shoulders, and stepped out into the cold December evening. The evidence folder tucked under his arm contained 40 years of trust violated and the financial proof to make denial impossible. With each step toward the house glowing with holiday lights, Robert felt increasingly certain. Catherine had said her lover wasn't expecting him for Christmas. He smiled slightly at the thought. Neither was she. Robert turned his key in the lock, a small act of ownership that suddenly felt profound. The sounds of celebration reached him from the dining room, glasses clinking, conversation flowing, Catherine's practiced laugh rising above it all. Christmas music played softly in the background, a festive soundtrack to the scene he was about to disrupt. He paused in the entryway, allowing himself one steadying breath. The evidence folder weighed in his hand, 40 years of trust reduced to financial statements and receipts. The Christmas tree they'd decorated together for decades stood in the corner, presents piled beneath it. Some, he noticed with a cold clarity, bearing gift tags to Catherine from Michael. Robert stepped into the dining room doorway. The conversation halted mid-sentence, as if someone had pressed mute. 8 pairs of eyes turned toward him, expressions ranging from confusion to shock. At the head of the table, his place for 30 years, sat Michael Grant, champagne glass frozen halfway to his lips. Catherine recovered first, performance skills honed over decades of deception. "Robert," she exclaimed, rising quickly. "What a wonderful surprise. I thought you were visiting Barbara." Her eyes telegraphed warning, panic briefly cracking her composed facade. She moved toward him, attempting damage control. "Everyone, my husband decided to join us after all." "I decided I couldn't miss Christmas in my own home," Robert replied, voice steady despite his pounding heart. "Especially when I'm paying for it." His gaze shifted to Michael. "You must be the man who wasn't expecting me." The room fell silent again, tension replacing festivity. Robert recognized their neighbors, the Chens, looking uncomfortable. James sat rigid in his chair, confusion evident in his expression. Two couples he didn't recognize completed the gathering, friends of Catherine's, or perhaps Michael's. "Robert, darling, you're confused again," Catherine said loudly, her hand gripping his arm as she attempted to guide him from the room. "Let me help you to your study. You're embarrassing yourself." He gently but firmly removed her hand. "I'm not confused, Catherine. For the first time in years, I see everything clearly." With deliberate calm, Robert placed the folder on the table and opened it. "For anyone interested in the truth, here's what's been happening while I believed I was in a faithful marriage." He began methodically presenting evidence, bank statements showing withdrawals coinciding with Catherine's shopping trips, credit card records documenting gifts and dinners, hotel charges during his business trips. His financial manager's precision served him well, each point delivered with clarity rather than accusation. "Over $200,000, he concluded. "Money set aside for our retirement, spent on an affair conducted in the home I've paid for throughout our entire marriage." Catherine's strategy shifted instantly from concern to attack. "Robert is having cognitive issues," she announced to the room. "His doctor has suggested evaluations. This is exactly the kind of paranoid behavior. I saw Michael's car at your house multiple times when Robert was away," Diana Chen interrupted quietly. "Tuesday afternoons, usually." The room turned to Diana in shock. Her husband nodded confirmation beside her. "We never said anything because—" Diana hesitated, looking genuinely remorseful. "Well, it wasn't our place." Catherine's face hardened, abandonment of the concerned wife act now complete. "This is ridiculous. My private life is no one's business." "It becomes my business when it's funded with my money," Robert replied evenly. James rose from his chair, examining the financial documents with a lawyer's scrutiny. His expression shifted from doubt to realization as he reviewed the evidence his mother had prevented him from seeing at their lunch. "Dad," he began, voice thick with regret. Michael stood abruptly. "I think I should leave." "Probably wise," Robert agreed. "Though I'm curious, did you know you were sleeping with a married woman, or was that part of the excitement?" Without answering, Michael gathered his coat and left, the front door closing with decisive finality behind him. Several guests followed, murmuring awkward apologies, leaving only the Chens, James, and Catherine remaining with Robert. "You've ruined everything," Catherine hissed, mask completely discarded. "No," Robert corrected gently. "I simply stopped paying for it." James crossed the room to stand beside his father. The simple act of solidarity brought the first tear Robert had allowed himself since entering the house. Their eyes met in wordless understanding. Apology offered, forgiveness granted, relationship beginning to mend. The Christmas tree lights blinked steadily in the corner, illuminating the truth that had finally emerged from shadows. In the wreckage of the evening, Robert stood tall, dignity intact, vindication bittersweet but necessary. The house that had witnessed 40 years of their marriage now witnessed its unraveling, but Robert felt no regret, only the quiet satisfaction of truth finally spoken aloud. Spring sunshine warmed Robert's face as he drove past the house he'd called home for 30 years. The foreclosure sign stood stark against the manicured lawn, a consequence he hadn't sought but couldn't prevent once he stopped making mortgage payments. Catherine had been given ample opportunity to take over the financial responsibility she'd been content to let him bear throughout their marriage. She hadn't. He felt no satisfaction in the foreclosure, only a strange sense of closure. The house had been a vessel for memories, some genuine, others tainted by revelations of that Christmas night. Now it would become home to another family, hopefully one built on more honest foundations. Robert pulled into the parking lot of Riverside Cafe, where James waited at their regular Thursday table. These weekly lunches had become a bridge back to each other, each meeting gradually rebuilding what Catherine's manipulations had damaged. "Dad," James greeted him, rising for an embrace that had become less awkward with repetition. They settled into comfortable conversation about James's cases, Robert's volunteer work, plans for summer. The careful avoidance of painful topics had given way to more authentic exchange as weeks passed. "I saw Mom yesterday," James said finally, testing the waters. Robert nodded, encouraging him to continue. He'd made it clear from the beginning that he would never ask James to choose sides, never use him as a conduit for bitterness. "She and Michael broke up," James continued. "Apparently once the financial reality set in." "I'm sorry for her," Robert said, surprised to find he meant it. 40 years couldn't be erased, even by betrayal. The condo she rented is expensive. "She's thinking of moving in with Aunt Linda." Robert absorbed this without comment. Catherine's sister had always lived beyond her means as well. They would suit each other. "Diana Chen called," Robert said, changing the subject. "She invited me to their anniversary party next month." "You should go," James encouraged. "People miss you." The conversation shifted to James's daughter's upcoming dance recital. Robert pulled out his wallet to pay, finding the family photo he still carried, now carefully trimmed to show just him and James. After lunch, Robert drove to Martin's apartment, where they'd planned to watch the baseball game. Their friendship had deepened beyond shared betrayal to genuine connection, two men navigating similar currents in the river of life after long marriages. "Drove by the old house today," Robert mentioned as Martin handed him a coffee. "Still standing, I assume?" Martin's dry humor had become a welcome constant. For now. "New family by summer, probably." They settled into comfortable silence, the ball game providing background to unspoken understanding. Their weekly gathering had become another cornerstone in Robert's reconstructed life. Later, Robert returned to his new home, a modest two-bedroom cottage closer to town. The porch swing he'd installed creaked gently as he settled into it, watching the sunset paint the sky in colors Catherine had once said reminded her of their honeymoon. The memory no longer stung as it once had. He'd brought little from the old house, some books, his grandfather's clock, select photographs. The furnishings were new, chosen by him alone. The garden, though small, had begun responding to his weekend attention, spring bulbs pushing through soil with promising determination. A peaceful tear tracked down his cheek as he sipped his evening coffee. Not from loss or anger, but from something more complex. Acknowledgement of pain weathered, appreciation for simple beauty, recognition that endings could contain beginnings. The financial hit had been substantial. $200,000 couldn't be recovered, and the divorce settlement, though fair, had required selling investments he'd hoped would fund his later years. His lifestyle was simpler now, his future less certain in material terms. Yet as he watched birds settling into the feeder he'd built, Robert felt surprisingly content. The weight of deception had lifted. The performance of a marriage had ended. What remained was authentic. His relationship with James, friendship with Martin, quiet dignity of a life rebuilt on truth rather than comfortable illusion. He raised his coffee cup in silent toast to the sunset. Freedom, he'd discovered, tasted better than security built on lies. The path ahead might be narrower than the one he'd planned, but it was undeniably his own. Isn't it something, dear reader, how trust built over decades can shatter in a single moment? You've been there too, haven't you? Sitting in a quiet room like Robert, your world suddenly tilting on its axis when something you believed unshakable begins to crumble. That first tear falling onto papers that shouldn't matter so much, but somehow matter more than anything. The grandfather clock ticking away moments of a life you thought you understood. We've all faced betrayal in some form, haven't we, folks? Maybe not a spouse's affair discovered through bank statements, but trust broken nonetheless. A friend's whispered words behind your back. A child's dismissal of your concerns as just getting older. A business partner's hidden agenda. The sting feels the same, that hollow space suddenly opening in your chest, the momentary doubt about your own perceptions, the ground shifting beneath feet that have walked this earth for 6 or 7 decades. But here's what I've learned from Robert's journey, and perhaps you've discovered it too. Our years aren't just marks of time past. They're wisdom accumulated, strength gathered, resilience tested. When Catherine dismissed Robert as confused and aging, she misunderstood something fundamental. Those gray hairs and reading glasses don't signal weakness. They represent survival, adaptation, overcoming. The same methodical attention that built his career became the tool to reclaim his dignity. The experience that allowed him to recognize patterns in financial statements helped him see patterns in deception. The path forward after betrayal isn't straight or easy. You'll spend nights on park benches, doubled over with grief no one witnesses. You'll question memories that once seemed certain. You'll face moments when giving up feels like the only sensible choice. The tears will come, sometimes in angry streams, sometimes in quiet drops that surprise you in ordinary moments. But morning always follows even the darkest night. A smaller house can hold greater peace. A porch swing facing the sunset can become a throne of quiet dignity. New routines replace old ones. Relationships transform, some strengthened through honest rebuilding, others released with neither malice nor regret. The heart, that stubborn muscle that's weathered so many seasons, continues its steady rhythm. What matters in the end isn't what was taken from you, but what remains unshakably yours, your integrity, your wisdom, your capacity to begin again. The story doesn't end with betrayal. It continues with you, sitting in evening light, sipping coffee from a mug that's yours alone, watching birds return to the feeder you built with your own hands.